Welcome to my July 2022 webinar. Tonight we're talking about the free-range child in all of us and looking at what holds us back, but we're also going to look at what moves us forward and what makes us a free-range child. This webinar is really about how to express yourself freely, how to just let it out. And most of us find that, although we can do that, sometimes there's a certain inhibition within us. Something holds us back from being completely who we might otherwise be. And of course, part of that is necessary so that we can function in society. If we're a complete radical, not a free radical, not bound to anything, then it can be very difficult to function in society, and we may actually find ourselves rather unhappy. So we're going to talk about how we express ourselves and why we don't. Like the universe, life is ever expanding, and watching the presentation of the first images from the James Webb telescope, it's out there millions some miles from Earth, orbiting with it's got a protective shield so that the mirrors stay cold. I mean, really cold. They're just a little bit above absolute zero, but they're protected from the sun energy, which even at 1,000,000 miles is strong enough to warm it. And that warming causes warping, and then you don't get the sharpness of the images. So that thing is out there, and it's looking deep into space to a time relatively soon after the Big Bang. The light from those images coming some 14 billion light years of distance, and that means 14 billion years old. They've also, just as a side note, again demonstrated the effect of gravity on the movement of light, something that Einstein had predicted and had been finally observed. And of course, it's been observed many times since, but they're actually using a galaxy cluster, the gravity of a galaxy cluster, to focus light from the far distant galaxies, so that more light reaches us, enough light to see them clearly. So it's an amazing technological accomplishment. I'll talk more about it a little bit later when we talk about what drives scientists to be explorers. We always want to know more. We always want to discover more. We always want to understand more. And that drive for that need for that is very fundamental to human nature. I've been astounded over the course of just the last couple of decades to learn how much is now known about the migrations and travels of people from the earliest days of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, who ranged over much of the Earth, so very long ago. Clearly, there was an inspiration to get out and see what was out there. And so people moved all around Europe and Asia, coming out of Africa, and moved around Europe and Asia, and went north and, very far to the east, and eventually came to the northern hemisphere of the Americas, and also apparently to the southern hemisphere of the Americas via sea routes, which is very remarkable and wonderful demonstration of the impulse in human nature to explore and learn and discover new things. And there's many, many wonderful accounts of how these peoples traveled and what they had and what they discovered. And a lot is known about the things they traded with other tribes along the way. So it was quite a part of human nature But why, if we start off exploring the universe, why do we seem to stop? Why do we settle? Why do we stop growing, if you really want to put it in its most core value? And the answer to these kinds of questions, there's a superficial value of that, which is very important, which is our fear of failing, our fear of falling flat on our faces and getting hurt. So it's a fear of getting hurt, really. But there's also a fear of change. There's a part of us that needs stability. And to be an adventurer is in contrast to living a stable existence. And so throughout the history of humans, there's been some people along the way who have stayed put. They'll get to a place and they'll go like, this is where I want to be. And so they'll establish themselves in a place. But some others within the group may decide that they want to go on. And I remember reading a wonderful account called The Walking People. It's a book that is available, which is the story of I believe it's the Iroquois Nation, how they got there and where they came from and what drove them and what kinds of things happened that were great learning lessons. And of course, through much of the tradition of the North American Native Americans, what we call native, they arrived actually from Asia, most of them from Northern Asia, but some from the Polynesian area. This history showed that at many points along the path, as they came to the North America and then eventually traversed North America to wind up in New England, different parts of the group would discuss, and in those days, discussions went on for a long period of time, literally years. Oh, this group wants to stay put, and maybe another group wants to go off in a different direction entirely. And so the group would split up. And it is recorded that some of them went south and into the Southwest, and others came east, and eventually came to New England. At some point, and I'm not quite sure where they were, but it may have been Ohio or it may have been further east. They decided to send, I think it was 2 or 3 people, back along the path, what they remembered of the path, remembered by history, because this was generations, but what by stories, they had a path to go back and try to find the other group. And so they went back and they went to the Southwest, and they found a tribe whose language was very similar to theirs, but not quite the same. And they came to believe that this tribe had descended from the group that had split off and gone south. So all of this just to illustrate the innate drive in people to explore, to see new things, and to, learn more about how the world works. So the answers to these questions are about the things that hold us back. The answer to the question about why do we stop, about the things that hold us back, a fear of getting hurt, fear of change. Last month, we in our webinar, we talked about the fear of change. So I'm not really going to talk about that this month, but we just want to remember that that sense in us that we fear what may happen, the fear of the change, is a very important factor. This month, we're going to look at our fear of failure, of fear of pain, and the pain of that can be brought to us from those who see us fail, but oftentimes it's just ourselves. We just quite a lot over the last couple of years to get into a new house. And it was, building a house is a big project. And then the moving is, it just goes on and on. And there was a part of me that has been kind of feeling that, okay, now I've got the house. Now what do I do? And on the one hand, my life is already, I've made some decisions about my life, one of which is to babysit my youngest granddaughter, um, and to continue my practice and probably do a lot more work on my practice if my life becomes a little more stable and I spend less time trying to figure out, my housing and situation in the future. So there's this tendency to set goals, get to a point, and then we go like, and now what do I do? Rather than seeing life as flowing through a whole series of circumstances and adventures and challenges and rewards and happy times and productive times and times when we feel really good about what we're doing. And it's not always consistent. So those are the basic parameters. So anyway, what is a free range child? I love that term. I think we all know what a free range animal is: chickens or other livestock, grass-fed beef, any things that have been in the pasture or been in the around the barn or whatever, but not locked up, having an opportunity to be free. And the idea is, if you're going to eat meat, you should at least eat meat that was happy at one time. So we have a pretty good sense of what the word free range means. But what is a free range child? So I got to tell you a little story about how that came about. That term about having within us a free range child. I was visiting a friend of mine who's also a healer, and there was a kid playing in the street, and he was playing with small fireworks. This was before the 4th of July, and he was playing with small fireworks, poppers, I think they're called, that you throw down on the ground and they explode and they make a little pop. They're no big deal, but they're quite fun for a young boy and probably a young girl too. We won't be gender specific. But anyway, he was out there, and my colleague referred to the kid as a free range child, by which he meant that the kid didn't have a lot of supervision and was free to just experiment in life. And he was experimenting with fireworks that day and having a great time. You could just tell by watching him. He was really enjoying what he was doing. And, was learning from the experience. Unfortunately, he didn't have any painful experiences to learn from. He was, because the things he had were really quite safe, and he was having a great time. So that's where the term free range child came from. But applying that to ourselves, the free range child is the part of us that just wants to explore and play in the world and learn and grow, like, all the time. And part of it's what's implied in that, as I said, a child who hasn't had much supervision is a person who is relatively free of the constraints of society and the physical world in which they live, who just goes out and does what they want to do. And we all know people like that. And when we say that, of course, we're suggesting that some people are very much free range children and maybe not too stable, not too settled, and having specific goals and values like that. There are people who just want to explore. And some of what they do is kind of like adolescence. They're exploring, but there's a certain daring in what they do. And so they may participate in extreme sports or other things where there's really some risk involved. So the free range child is almost oblivious to the sense of risk. They may not protect themselves very much. And that even in the free range child within us, who, as in adult life, just does extreme things and things that clearly carry a risk. So that's my sense of what a free range child within us looks like. And I think we all have a free range child in us. Some of us may keep that free range child a little bit less free. Certainly when we're growing up, our experience usually is that we're not all that free. There's all kinds of rules and authority figures in our lives, starting with our parents. And we all know about the parents that we call them helicopter parents, the ones that hover over us and to a considerable degree may hold us back. And parents who may also, or just on its own, may have predetermined goals for us. They want us to be a certain way. They want us maybe to have either a position of status, or that we have, if we're in the trades, that we have a certain trade. It was traditional, of course, that children, particularly sons, follow in their father's trade, and particularly if that was a kind of hands-on kind of trade. That was a very common thing, and it was just expected. And then of course daughters were generally expected to play the women's role in society as it was defined by society. And so there is, excuse me, there's a sense of the child naturally seeking experience. That's just a nice way to say that, right? They want to do stuff. And sometimes it's a destructive, and sometimes, it's dangerous. And parents react, they want to protect us, or they want to preserve what they've got. You can't just go throwing the dishes around and seeing if they break. Parents will go like, no, don't do that, and they should. So we have to, the parents have the intention of helping us learn the rules of society, for better or worse, but that's what they're doing. So the parents may very much want to be involved in a child's life to make sure that they're safe and that they learn the rules of society. And also, when I say safe, to really protect them from dangers. And let's face it, this is a fairly dangerous world now. It's a kind of crowded world. There's a lot of people. And when there's crowding, there's a greater chance of people hurting each other, people doing nasty things to them. So protecting children is paramount. And in our society now, parents are roundly criticized if they have left their child vulnerable to getting hurt in any way, using drugs, so on and so forth, if you're talking adolescents. So many parents are zealous about protecting a child's safety, to the point of keeping the kid from actually exploring and feeling safe and comfortable in the world. And then there's those parents, as I said, who really want to guide their child. And they're called helicopter parents. They're hovering over the child all the time. That's the helicopter. And they're really controlling the child's life. They set routines, bedtimes and meal times, and, they engage them in all kinds of extracurricular activities. And they're like omnipresent in a child's life. And that can bring, a sense of safety and security to a child, but it can also bring a sense of having this boundary or set of boundaries, that limit their life and make them feel cramped, and, that they don't have their own life. Same thing happens when you go to school. All kinds of rules. You can do this, you can't do that, or you must do this and you can't do that. So there's a lot of shoulds and you musts that are involved in school life. And then there's all the social pressures, right? That if you don't fit in, you will be ostracized considerably and often bullied. And so that, if you have any kind of handicap, or you're somebody on the spectrum a bit, or you're just shy, then, or other, lots of other things, you may be bullied quite a bit. And part of the bullying is a natural competitiveness amongst kids. So there are the bullied, and then there's the bullies. And I guess I said that backwards. There are bullies, and then there are the bullied. And it's part of growing up, so to speak, is dealing with that. And a traditional attitude in this country is to allow people to be that, allow people to be bullies because that's their nature, and allow people to be bullied because that's their nature, to be victims like that. And um, in recent decades, there's been at least some tendency to stop bullying or try to, keep it under control, and to educate kids to be kind, compassionate, generous, and so on. So anyway, we have a lot of rules. There's a lot of pressures on us, and there are a lot of dangers that we have to look out for, and those all of those things can limit the sense of freedom that we have to just be ourselves. As a pediatrician, I saw this situation. I can't tell you how many times it was really very common situation, because it just did something I didn't mean to do. It's a very common situation. Sorry, I'm making a note to myself here, not to get lost. Sorry, I just got to pick up my thought again. Not to get lost in all the structure that our society imposes on us. And, I've seen parents who, well, I used the term before, helicopter parents who are so involved in their child's life that the child feels cramped, feels that they're not free to be themselves. And so many of us have to go back and look at our childhood and see how much of that we've internalized. That was really the point I was trying to get to, is that we internalize these restrictions and these rules, which may be helpful, but it may also limit us. And so the balance of those things is very much a part of what we're going to work on tonight, which is finding that balance between the freedom and the structure. So that's a big thing that we're going to talk about. There was a book. I have a copy. I haven't read too much of it because my initial reading of it was so many words, but it's beautifully written. It's really a gem to read. It was originally written in Spanish, I believe, and it's called Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pincola Estes. And we get the notion from her writing that it's possible to fully express ourselves even though society puts innumerable obstacles in our way or criticizes our behavior. And even though internal doubts and blocks inhibit our behavior, we can overcome that. And that's basically the lesson for the presentation today, is that we can overcome the things that block us if we recognize that they're there. If we catch ourselves doing, well, I'm going to give an example from my own life, where I argue with myself about the wisdom of doing something, which is a kind of cover up for saying you're just chicken, or, you've been told not to do this. Are you really going to go do it? And so that's a typical kind of thing that many of us do to ourselves, that hold us back, that keep us from really expressing ourselves. There was a television show that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, called The West Wing. There was a president, Jeb Bartlett, and Jeb used to conclude discussions of issues and policies by saying, "What's next?" And when doing so, he signaled, on the practical level, he signaled the end of discussion as well as the starting point of a new discussion. A kind of abrupt transition. So it was saying, like, okay, we've talked about this thing. Here's what we're going to do. What's next? What new topic do we have to cover? And this was necessary because the president has so many things to deal with. And being a president of the United States, for instance, is really hard work because you have to deal with so many different things. one has to be able to make decisions. And that means recognizing that the need to collect facts, to collect information, to collect ideas or feelings about things, judgments about things, to get it all put together so you can grasp it as a president and then make a decision. And the show The West Wing, if you watch it with kind of that in mind, it's quite instructive. It really is a marvelous example of that you can learn from about how to navigate in your life, how to gather the information that you need, come to a decision, and move on to the next thing. Now, I'm going to share again another personal story because I've been doing this house thing, and I can't tell you how many decisions that had to be made. And deciding about structure and function in a house and decorating and stuff, those are not my strong points. Those are not things I know a lot about. And so my family was very helpful to me and, would give me input on various things, but I had to make the decisions, and I had to very quickly come to recognize, what do I like? What do I need? What are we going to do? Make a decision. That's it, because now it's going to be put into the building, move on. And so, yeah, I did a lot of that recently. It was kind of fun, actually. And I found that I liked a lot of the decisions I made. There are a couple of things that I wish I had done differently. But so far, I'm not too upset with what I did, and generally am quite happy, quite pleased with it. I'm thinking as I'm saying that about the wall sconces, the lights that are around in the center of the building to provide light, and then what other kinds of things we did. I had to get cabinets and countertops for the kitchen, and flooring. What are you going to put on the floor? And what color? And so there are just so many decisions like that. So it's a very, very exciting thing for me. I enjoyed it a great deal, but it certainly puts me in touch with this sense of we've got to make a lot of decisions. How do you go about doing that? Now, as a physician, practicing physician, where I had a lot of kids in the hospital or sick kids otherwise that had to be dealt with, I made decisions all day long. And some of them were really big or important decisions in the sense of, helping a person recover from whatever was going on with them. And, most of the time I felt good about the decisions. Every once in a while, I felt like that wasn't the smartest thing to do or the best thing to do necessarily. But most of the time, not most of the time, almost all the time, I was happy with the decisions I made, but very much aware of the pace of having to make decisions. And as I said, important decisions. But I was well trained as a physician. And so, I could do that kind of thing. Okay, let's kind of wrap this up now, and then we'll get on to our group clearing session, where we're really going to work through some of the things that are holding us back and balance between our tendency to explore and enjoy adventure and our needs to be safe, secure, stable, and be able to navigate in society. When we consider our needs to grow and to be safe and stable, they're not opposites, but they're different things that we have to deal with. Most of us are neither all one or the other, right? There are a few people we'll look at and we'll say, wow, they are just wild. They are the wild child. They just, unbounded. And then there are others we say, wow, they're really uptight. They're really constrained. They really hold themselves back. But most of us are a mixture of those things. And I've been, as I reach this point in my life where I have a new home and, I've taken on certain responsibilities and stuff, and I'm looking at that and I'm going like, what's next? Thinking about the West Wing, what's next? And what do I want to keep? And who am I in that process? The people, I wanted to get back to the presentation of images from the James Webb telescope, these first images. The people presenting these images demonstrate marvelously this relationship between the excitement of exploration and adventure, and the need to be, and in this case, they are scientists. That is, they study carefully, they plan, they organize, they cogitate on things for great length. They test, experiment, with things and test it out, develop new technologies. And, that takes a great deal of creativity, but it's also based on what is known. But, to put up a new telescope and justify the expense, they really had to do marvelous things, which they actually told us. But I loved watching them today on YouTube is where it was, this presentation. Loved watching the excitement in the scientists, the joy, the big smiles on their faces, the absolute delight in what they had accomplished. And so that was the wild child in them coming through, but also very much being scientists, being logical and organized and stable and clear and settled in their nature and their jobs. This was a 25-year project. And it's not even come to a culmination. It's just, now it works. Now they have to use the telescope to learn all kinds of things about the universe. And so you saw so clearly in these people the balance between the wild child and the stable being. What these people don't have is a lot of fear. They aren't inhibited by that internal stuff that checks so many of us. But they do have constraints. They need to raise the funds to do this kind of thing. They need to work with colleagues. Which are international colleagues. People all over the world are involved in this project. So there's so much required of them to be stable, and so much is required that they be absolutely imaginative and creative. So it was just a wonderful thing to see these people today, showing their excitement and being real scientists all the way. So we're composed of these contrasting tendencies to be an explorer and adventurer while still being safe and sure. The former qualities, exploring and adventurer and creative mind, brings in stability, but it also brings excitement and growth. It motivates us to learn more and do more and take risks. The latter brings stability, safety, and the assurance of knowing things and of being comfortable in the world. These are not incompatible things, but merely contrasting. And part of our life mission is learning to live with both parts of that in ourselves. Some people seem to be compulsive seekers of thrills and adventure. Others seem to be cautious, thoughtful, even fearful. But most of us are a more even mixture of these tendencies. And it's very, very important that we learn to accept both of these tendencies as valued parts of ourselves, rather than trying to make judgments one or the other, to either direction, to make such judgments about ourselves that, you're uptight or you're too wild. So how do we give ourselves permission to explore and grow in an ever-changing, often dangerous, and very judgmental world? We have to ask constantly whether the fences that hold us back, both the external barriers and the internal blocks, we have to ask, are they valid, fair, and reasonable? We have to put our desires for new experience and further growth above our fears of failing, of getting hurt. And we have to find balance in our pursuit of knowledge. We have to discover that we already have the resilience and fortitude to either rise above or to transcend the impediments and dangers all around us, and to integrate what we experience while discriminating what is valid and consistent with our path. Now, rising above in this context is a psychological resilience and being relatively unaffected by the possibility of pain from failure or rejection. Transcending means retiring into the transcendental field of pure consciousness, which is free of suffering, there's no pain, and the source of our creative intelligence. And so both sides of that, the superficial side of being psychologically strong and resilient, and the mechanical side, if you will, it's consciousness, the consciousness side of transcending any possibility of suffering and being in contact with creative intelligence. And that will lead us to our topic next month, which is divine guidance, opening to automation in administration of our lives. So that's our presentation for now. It's late, so I'm going to just end this here, and then we will do our group clearing session and really get into exploring that. So thank you for joining. It's been wonderful. I hope those of you that later get to watch this on YouTube have found it valuable. Bye for now.